Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky, and today we have a very special guest, Sally Loftis of Loftis Partners. Sally, how are you today?
I am wonderful. The sun is shining, and I'm grateful.
It's actually shining here too in Massachusetts, which is very strange.
Yeah. We have really long winters. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and our winters are like a good 6 months. So a sunny day in the middle of winter is a gift.
There you go. And so thank you for having this. I'm sorry, I'm not saying thank you to you. I'm saying it to the weather gods. Thank you very much for shining on us today.
Yes.
So Sally, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to today.
Yeah, well, I mean, I won't go back to the day I was born, but I will say, I grew up in the South in a small town. My caregivers kind of worked in the margins of the community. So that really made me aware of some of the inequalities in the world, right? These people maybe who weren't seen or heard. And kind of fast forward to college, decided to major, and pursue a career in human resources. And so I've worked in human resources for the last 25 years and really focused more on the strategy side. And so in the last 10 years, I've kind of moved into a niche around pay equity, especially within nonprofits and small businesses. So that's where a lot of my work happens now, but also in organization development and social justice.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, but you're probably pretty busy too.
Yes, I am.
So, Sally, one fun thing that no one knows about you.
This was a hard one because the people in my house know this, but I'm completely obsessed with our dog, Rocky, and I literally talk to him like he's our child. He's a Shepadoodle. Oh and goodness. Even when no one is home, like I'm totally talking to him. He sits in my front seat of my car when we drive around.
He wears a seatbelt, right?
I have to buckle the seatbelt because otherwise my car beeps. So yeah, we say he's our favorite child. I'm just joking.
Being a crazy dog person, I understand what you're saying. I actually have two dogs, both pug, one pug mix, one pug, pure pug. Aww. And they are my kids beyond the three that have the two legs. So
exactly. Same. I have three two-legged ones too.
Yes. Well, I don't necessarily think that's necessarily that different than most dog owners. Most dog owners consider their dogs children. So, but I will give you one thing. I definitely don't have my dogs in the front seat. So that's definitely unique.
I live in a small town, so most people know me when they see me, and they'll be like, It's so funny. Your dog looks just like a person in the front seat.
Well, a Shepadoodle's probably pretty big too, right?
He's like 45 pounds.
Oh,
so
not that big.
Yeah.
My pug mix was 70, probably about, I don't know, 20 dinners ago, 30 dinners ago.
I was like, that's a big pug.
No, well, but he's got the mind of a pug, so he wants to eat forever.
Of course.
But he's a Norwegian Elkhound, pug, rat terrier, and boxer mix. So quite eclectic, the family.
Cute,
that he has,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We'll talk genealogy at some other time. But first,
yes.
So let's transition over to our topic today, which is a really amazing one, and one that we've talked on the HR Data Labs podcast a lot. It has a lot to do with a lot of things, and you talked a little bit about it in your intro. Our topic for today is pay equity and digging into your pay data. So, what's so important about digging into your pay data? What will you find? What might you find?
This is William Tincup, and I'd like to direct you to a wonderful limited series podcast that Ryan and I recorded live at the ERE Recruiting Innovation Summit. We sat down with 20 recruiting and TA leaders from around the world to hear what today's best recruiters are doing to stay sharp, stay relevant, and stay ahead. It's called The Talent Shift. You'll love it. You'll find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Listen, like, review, share. Do you?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I appreciate it because I feel like pay equity and pay transparency are words we hear a lot now, right? And a lot of people are talking about it, but we don't always kind of have our hands around really what it means. And so one thing is important when you're looking at pay data is that you really need to look at it beyond just kind of overall and at the position level. It's important to look at it around some of those demographic markers if you have access to that data, right? Around maybe, by department, by gender, by race and ethnicity, by tenure, by age, things like that. Because what happens is that's when you start really uncovering more of some of the inconsistencies in your data. For instance, you may be like, hey, 5 years ago, the technology department was our priority and we were willing to pay, 30% more than everybody else at the time. And that process has never changed, but now that's really not the same. And you've never kind of updated your internal kind of pay systems and decision making. And so digging deep helps you kind of see some of those little things that you hadn't really thought about in a while, but really probably need to change.
And you mentioned when you dig in. Who's the you in this circumstance? Who are the people who are actually doing that digging?
Well, it varies across company. Obviously, there are vendors out there who offer, will do the pay equity, some of those assessments for you if you have the software, HR, maybe the HRIS that does that. Some people, some HR people are able to do it themselves. Actually, I have a blog post that shows people how to do a free pay equity assessment, kind of based on what I'm describing, that you can, basically do on your own if you have the data accessible to you.
Well, a lot of times when we deal with pay equity, a lot of the audience that we're dealing with is primarily at the head of HR level or at the head of HR plus the general counsel level. So it's not every HR generalist, not HR business partner, not every compensation person even will have access to or should be doing those analyses, right?
I mean, obviously, I think it depends on the team and what level of access they have to that. So, for instance, I worked at a corporation for many years where I was kind of part of the greater HR team, and then the compensation team would come in once a year and we'd sit down and review all the pay data for that department of, 1,000 people and, kind of work through that. But then I also work with a lot of small businesses and nonprofits where HR, they may not have an HR person, or, it's more of like a generalist role versus like somebody, who's a director level or something like that. So that then becomes a little bit different than if you have an entire HR team that's kind of there and ready to do the work.
Right. So it really does vary on who they are, how big they are, and what resources they have at their disposal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's talk a little bit next about what are disparities? Because you mentioned basically a Rubik's Cube of lots of different things, right? So you could test by gender, you can test by ethnicity, race, age, disability, veteran status. There's a ton. Where do you start?
Yeah, I think one thing is whenever you're doing that and, kind of pulling that pay equity assessment out and doing the work, first is approaching it with a sense of curiosity. A lot of people, one, don't want to do the assessment because they're scared of what they might find.
Exactly.
Right. Two is that they'll be like, oh my gosh, we're, really bad in these areas. And it's more about like, let's just kind of look at it and see what's happened. Because even especially, with larger corporations, sometimes you just inherit pay structures that you didn't create. Very few times in my HR career have I gotten to create, an organization's pay structure from scratch. And so, or there's just, mergers and acquisitions, high turnover, whatever. So understanding that we all inherit situations that maybe we didn't approve or weren't, didn't have any involvement, but just preparing for the conversations that might happen. Because what I find is when you start digging into that pay data, it's almost like a weaving, right? And once you kind of pull that key string, things start unraveling because you start having conversations about, well, the promotion process or, the hiring practices or maybe development for a staff member. So it tends to kind of connect to a lot of other things.
Well, you're getting into something beyond even just strictly pay equity, because a lot of times pay equity starts at base salary. And I think you're getting into a couple of other things here. You're getting into opportunity. You're getting into maybe incentives, overtime.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other things beyond just base pay in pay equity that then could get looked at.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great insight because, one thing I typically will have conversations with people with, because we pretty quickly start talking about benefits, right?
Yeah.
Because then it's saying, one thing I work with organizations and really try to center employee voice in the process. So we're getting feedback, we're hearing from employees. And sometimes people are kind of surprised by, hey, in the last 2 years, maybe this benefit is not as important anymore, or maybe we need to add this benefit, or even some of the ways in which we work. Like I literally was just talking to a client yesterday about how they needed to kind of build some pause and reflection into their practices. And I just was like, what if you had like a no internal meeting day? Or what if you built a retrospective after each of these processes? And that's kind of something that helps the whole organization and wouldn't be categorized as an employee benefit, right? But might give people some capacity if they're giving you feedback about like, hey, my most important thing right now is not being so busy.
Right. And I hear you. And that's really a brilliant insight. I was thinking we're going to go a little differently on benefits, where most benefits that have been created have been centered on the family unit as it stood probably in 1950. And hasn't really evolved since then. You think about life insurance, you think about health, obviously health and welfare, is part of everything, like health insurance and dental insurance. But, it doesn't really cover off on things in 2024 that we really care about. Like, for example, pet insurances we were talking about before, or no, seriously too. But, are we missing the boat? Is there also part of pay equity that needs to look at what do people in 2024 need as far as benefits go?
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. I think one is like, what are you trying to motivate people to do? Right. And then two is, what are the supports you're putting into place for that? And, supports as far as in the workplace, but also around benefit structure. So to your point, it's been kind of a one size fits all with benefits. And for me, at least in my HR roles, there was always like looking at the utilization numbers, right? Yeah. How many people are using this? And so I think there's a shift that's happening and will continue to happen, that there's probably going to be maybe an increase of benefits or an expansion of benefits in a way that it may only apply to a few people. It may not be something that everybody wants to opt into, but it's really important to that group of people. It's important for you to have it. So it's kind of almost like targeted benefits, a little bit like a multi-tier program.
Well, in the old days, back in the 80s and 90s, we used to talk about something called a cafeteria plan.
Oh my gosh.
You got to check off the box of which one you want. And today we really do have something like that. It was really a la carte, where you don't just sign up for all your benefits. You actually have the choice of getting cash versus your benefits. And I think what you're talking about is a little different. You get to actually choose what benefits you'd like, even if they're not standardized, and even if you don't have the very high end, to be able to really make it make sense. There are some vendors that actually have that service where, they have a marketplace filled with benefit vendors or perquisite vendors, and you can sign up and the company signs up for it, and the employee gets to elect based on I guess you could say having a menu, and you pay the price.
Yeah. And sometimes I've seen where companies like give you, X many credits that equals however much dollars, and you kind of choose what you want,
exactly.
Right? I think the other thing around benefits to emphasize is with pay equity, once you get people all into living and thriving wages, your benefits conversation is different, right? Because if people aren't into the living and thriving wages, so they're taking anything they can get, it's like survival mode, right? So it's important to, I think, have that conversation alongside pay equity, but also know that may change once you get any pay equity changes implemented.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
Let's say somebody does an analysis and they find that there are gaps. And whichever way the gaps are, what happens next? What do the HR professionals do when they actually find inequities in their pay?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing is that people will assume that once they do the assessment, they're already communicated out to staff or employees. And I'm like, there needs to be a pause there, because we need to communicate these results with some actions, right? Like we need to kind of figure out, how are you going to address that? And so that's not always a quick or easy fix, right? What I'm finding is more, like I said earlier, is that people are having to kind of update their internal thinking systems, personally and organizationally and team-wise, and so it takes some time to kind of have some conversations. And it may be your step is like, we need to update our compensation philosophy,
right?
Or we need to change our promotion structure. And that may not, that could take 6 to 12 months sometimes if you're really doing it, and then you have a group of C-suite executives who may be super busy and have all these other things going on. So it's important to kind of think about, like, this is going to take some time, and how you communicate to employees about what you're doing or when you're doing it is just knowing that once you do the assessment, if you're telling them ahead of time, setting expectations well.
So let me step back a second though. But when we find that there are gaps, we need to make sure, first of all, there's statistically significant gaps, right? And the second thing I want to bring up is, don't you think that it's really a good time when those gaps are found to then communicate about transparency and about how things should work, especially given the way in which most states are going, or many states are going, and how those rules are kind of invasive to even non-regulated states? Don't you think the best way forward is to just be open then?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. When it comes to pay transparency, I tell people it's really important to not just be about the legal compliance of it, is about, like, it's an intervention of trust within the organization, right? And so you don't want somebody finding out what the person next to them is getting paid because they saw your job posting.
Right.
So there is an element that I work with the clients around, let's talk about your appetite for pay transparency. If you're in a state or country or whatever that doesn't have it, but if you do, and then trying to do that in a manner that builds trust rather than reactive, or, just kind of throwing something out there. There's a level of consent that needs to happen on that too. Like some people would be like, okay, we're just going to show everybody's pay. I'm like, don't do that.
Well, yeah, but that's not pay transparency. That's something else. I mean, that's...
Yeah. And like I said, I work with a lot of organizations that are smaller and are like, oh yeah, we can do that. But I'm like, no, there's some level of protection for the employees, but you can share ranges and help them understand how these ranges were established and how people move through the ranges. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that actually is a mature conversation from a business perspective as well as personal, because now what you're saying is, here's the data. Like, you're a professional, you're an adult. Here's the data that we use to judge who the right person is for this role and what level of pay we can support in that role. If you're being paid less than that and you're in that role, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to have a discussion about your performance, your experience. If you were going to be hired again today in that role, what rate would it be at? And then we'll talk about, fixing it over maybe it's immediate, maybe it's over the long term, or maybe it's during the next focal cycle. But at least it's a business conversation, and it's a mature conversation, not go ask your manager. And the manager goes, go ask HR. And there's the finger pointing that goes back and forth.
Well, it totally resonates with me, because I think about, there's times I work with companies that managers don't even have access to their employees' pay data, right?
Wow.
So that there's a level of education in having a manager pay that and structure that conversation well. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's really being able to, I usually work with clients to build a pay grid where anybody in the organization, you could kind of give them the resume, maybe of someone, and they could 99% of the time get it into, this is where this person should be paid based on what the grid is. So it's a little more objective in a very subjective world. And pay is such a mystery, right? Like, it's just, when I do focus groups with employees, I'll be like, so what pay conversations are you having at work? And they're like, it's the first time we've ever talked about pay in an open atmosphere. They're like, we don't, like, there's no conversations about pay unless it's like with HR in my performance review.
That's why we treat employees like children. We really do. And that's why I think transparency is finally maturing the conversation to a business discussion, not, some emotional, horrible conversation you can't have. When I worked at Morgan Stanley back in the 90s, it was a don't talk about pay or you'd get fired. It's not good.
Yeah. Well, and if you're doing the work around pay equity, right, and you're looking at cost of living and you've really kind of done that intentional strategic work around your pay ranges, then hopefully it becomes less emotional because you are paying people what they're worth, and that's tying to a living that they can afford and keep on and grow in their development, right? So it's not, as you know, working in HR, you're getting people's emergencies all the time of things happening at home or, whatever. And giving, pay equity allows people to have a little bit of cushion to handle the unexpected.
Exactly.
Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast, a free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today.
Let's talk about the third question, which is what can an HR person do right now to actually have these conversations or at least start them in their company?
Yeah, there's, several steps. One is breathe. It's okay. Pay.
You're going to live.
Yeah, you're going to live through this. And it's just a really good time to really kind of look at your pay right now. Coming out of the last 4 years, obviously the market has been so topsy-turvy. Y'all talked about that a lot on this podcast. And so things are starting to stabilize a little bit. So it's a great time to have those strategic conversations. I think one is just seeing kind of what the appetite is for those discussions within your decision-making group, whether that's your HR group, your C-suite, kind of see what people are willing to say. Also, I always say employee feedback, get your data, right? What are people saying? What are they, get all the data. I work with a lot of organizations that don't even have like really good employee feedback loops. So that may be the first place to start, right? Is starting to get that employee feedback. So it's really kind of starting to kind of prime the pump, right? Of like starting to have these conversations, kind of getting the ball rolling, because you don't want to jump into this and then find out, do an assessment and then find out nobody's going to do anything about it. Because then you're just sitting there holding the information.
Absolutely. And to me, it also starts with having conversations at the top and making sure that the leaders understand, especially finance, that there is something that we're going to find here. We don't know what it is yet, but we're going to find something. And when we do, we need your support to be able to understand how it's going to impact the business, because it will. And it might be small. It might be very small pockets of impact, but it could be big. And we're going to have to fix it one way or another, because this is an institutional problem or it's not. And either you get on board with the fact that we have to fix it or you don't. And that's a bigger problem. But if you don't have their support from the beginning, there's really no way of being able to be successful in this.
Great point. I work a lot with finance people in this work, obviously, because they're typically trying to do the kind of the cash flow, flow projections. But also to your point too, is looking at some of your data, right? If you have a 40% turnover rate, which is fairly common right now, thinking about what's the cost of constant recruitment and the lost work, right? For the 3 to 6 months it takes you to get a new person in and up to speed. If you could decrease your employee turnover by retaining more people, potentially with pay, really the money's there. You just kind of, the turnover is more of a lagging indicator in pay equity than a leading one. But if you're having more people accept job offers, having more people stay past the first year, those are all signs that you're doing the right thing.
And you're going to have to watch those metrics very carefully. And you're going to have to pay attention and feed them back and watch the feedback loops. And one of the things that I typically do when I'm at the start of this process is, to your point, it's not just about employee surveys. I love looking at term reasons. Term reasons give me that feedback that we either know or we don't know why someone left. and either it's detailed or it's really high level. But what I like to do before anything happens is, or as I'm trying to your point, prime the pump with feedback loops, is at least make the termination reasons well put together enough that I'll have the right reason codes that will at least either tell me the story or that don't make it so generic that it doesn't help me at all. And there are many companies that haven't looked at their term reasons in years anyway, so it's a good time to kind of open that table up and take a look.
That's such a great point. Yeah, there's some people who don't even do that work, right? Haven't kept up the data, don't do exit interviews. Of course, exit interviews when you're doing them internally, some people be real blunt with you on the way out, but some people, don't want to burn a bridge and may not share everything. But yeah, absolutely. Exit data is huge, a huge indicator for you.
So if there's anything else that you would tell someone when they first are getting started on this, what would you tell them? Is there any other advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I would say, kind of what my clients tell me is that they didn't realize that there was going to be kind of so much change management work in all of this, because it really is kind of pulling that thread that unravels the sweater. And so it ends up, you're having to have conversations in other areas that you weren't expecting. So really assessing your capacity. I mean, obviously I encourage everybody to go ahead and start doing it now, but understanding it's probably going to take more, it will take more time than you want it to, because you are having conversations, and it's going to take more of your work time than maybe you initially assess.
And maybe need more skill than you actually have, because you might have to do some regression analysis to see if there is statistical significance. You may need to do tons of Excel work. You may even need to gather more data, right? Like if you don't have all of those pieces of data on each person, you can't start this thing.
That's exactly right. I mean, sometimes your starting place, like I said, is just, do we even have the data?
Yeah.
And that's a good starting place.
So if you are going to try pay equity, you're going to try to find out where you are within the world of pay equity, you have a lot of work to do. And it wouldn't, both Sally and I are okay. If you want to hang up now, put the podcast down and go start looking. Go ahead. But if you're still with us, that's great. And we would encourage you to do whatever you can. Hire experts like Sally or myself to come in and give you some of our advice as well. But seriously, it's a journey. It's not a quick race. It's not like a foot race.
I love how you frame that. And I will say one thing I've learned from my clients is it's really important to be in community. Build community with organizations that are doing kind of the similar type of pay equity work or headed in that same direction. Start having conversations, because you're going to need some people. Of course, we consultants will stay all day long if you need us to, but you're going to need some people that you can just call up and be like, how did you, do this? Do you negotiate salaries?
Right.
What's your, 50% of my clients don't, 50% do. So, I mean, just kind of talking, through that kind of thing and business reasoning is super helpful.
All good words of wisdom. Sally, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it.
And we'll have to have you back on another topic, whatever's near and dear to your heart.
Sounds like it will be our dogs.
So that's our next episode with Sally Loftis. Sally, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, David.
Thank you all. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.